always welcome Bruce Fein into our broadcast studios, and Tim Murtaugh, who's a columnist and author of the Amazon bestseller, Swing Hard in Case You Hear It. It's a story of redemption. Bruce Fein, how did we go from the mainstream media announcing a ceasefire between Hamas, Egypt, and Qatar until all of a sudden Israel's firing missiles on Rafah? What did we miss here?
Well, I think this is not the first time when we've read stories that some kind of a ceasefire agreement was imminent. Sometimes the media, sometimes it's Tony Blinken, sometimes it's members of Qatar. Israel has not been in the forefront of suggesting that. And that's just because they're playing on hopes. I think that they don't really have a plan that is at all acceptable to Israel. And so they keep trying to press Israel into action by creating an expectation. Well, if it's not accepted, it's Israel's fault. But obviously you need two sides to agree to any kind of ceasefire. I do not believe that there's going to be any ceasefire in the indefinite future for a very simple reason. Hamas and its supporters view ceasefire as a step towards ultimately a two-state solution, which they see the ultimate end of the conflict. Israel is adamantly against any two-state solution, and therefore they don't look at a ceasefire as doing something that's positive in their case. And I don't think, in fact, Israel has a concrete idea of what's supposed to come after the conflict. It's not clear who would govern Gaza. I don't think Israel wants to be a completely occupying power. It got out of Gaza like 17 years ago. And that means, however, that politically, I think that Netanyahu has to keep up some kind of kinetic action, because that shows, okay, they're killing Hamas and they're doing something. It creates an appearance that he knows what he's doing, but I'm not sure that he does. It's the same way that we got into Vietnam. And we just had an appearance that we knew what we're doing, but we really didn't have any end game. You know, we overthrew governments and stayed forever without a clear understanding of what the goal was. And I think it's just a huge mess on both sides.
You know, Tim, I am truly torn over the fact that Israel literally kicked Al Jazeera out of their country, moved all their cameras, all their equipment, totally shut them out. I think of the fact that Russian television thrives in the United States. We have the same issues here, but the United States has never threatened to thrust our propaganda enemy out of the country. Israel feels as though they're the enemy, they're spreading misinformation. Was it the right move?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to try to put myself in Israel's place. I mean, just look at where they are located geographically in the world and the mortal enemies that they're surrounded by. Israel, I think, really occupies a unique position as far as its vulnerability goes in that part of the world. So when they talk about making what in this country would be a momentous decision to actually evict journalists, if they are in fact simply journalists, well, in this country it would be a bigger thing. I would suspect that in Israel it is something entirely different, because Israel is, you know, day by day always fighting for its very existence. So I think they probably believe that they live by different rules than a lot of other countries are around the world, and they don't have the First Amendment like we do, First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which governs things that go on in this country, of course. I think it's just a different situation.
Your comments, Bruce?
I think it's detrimental to Israel. Oftentimes, you know, you can make mistakes, and even your adversaries, if you will, can point out, you know, things that you're not looking at. Al Jazeera would have an insight into the Palestinian mentality, if you will. They really are an arm of Qatar. It doesn't mean everything they say is true, but Israelis are smart enough to make their own evaluation of what is credible and what is not. But oftentimes, governments can get corrected action if something is exposed in the media that they don't necessarily want to hear. They don't want to just have echo chambers, and in wartime that's more important rather than less. I think one of the reasons why our media, I think, cast sunshine on what was happening in Vietnam and helped ultimately an error correction. And we ended up leaving rather than staying forever. I think one of the reasons why we remained bogged down in Iraq is after Vietnam, we said, well, the press really isn't going to have open access to the battlefield. They need to be escorted. And we ended up with assumptions in Iraq that were totally flawed, and we're still in there today in 2023. It's not to say that the press doesn't make errors, but I have confidence that Israel is power enough that they can survive even as Al Jazeera is in Israel.
Tim, do you think there's even a slither of a chance that there will ever be a ceasefire and any semblance of a peace agreement in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, if you just look back at history, and I would never claim to be an expert on Middle East peace processes or even the regional politics of that part of the world, but from where I sit and from my observations of this entire conflict and the other conflicts that have involved that region of the world, I don't see, when people hear the word ceasefire, I think they mean a cessation of all hostilities. And I'm not sure that something like that is even possible, because during other alleged ceasefires, I think there have been rockets lobbed back and forth in both directions in that part of the world. So I'm not even sure that, when we talk about ceasefire, that we're really understanding what folks in that region are even talking about.
You have a new book. It's a fascinating book. Could you share with us some of the most challenging aspects of your journey from addiction to your role in the Trump campaign, and how did these experiences shape the insights you shared in your recently released book?
Well, thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate that, Armstrong. It's called Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, My Escape from Addiction and Shot at Redemption on the Trump Campaign. And it's half about politics. It's half about my life in politics, which, of course, includes the 2020 Trump campaign. But the other half of the book is my decades-long battle with alcohol and how I made it through. And I try to tell the story really in two different ways. And so it's unlike any other political book, I guarantee, that your viewers have ever read. I try to tell it. I alternate back and forth because I really feel like I've had two lives. I've had a sober life, which has been for the last almost 9 years, since 2015, and I've had a drinking life. And I'm very, very grateful that I was able to have the opportunity to work on the Trump campaign, because I had that in my background. I had an arrest record. I have a couple of DUIs, and it was going to be very difficult for me to get through the Trump campaign without that coming to light. And I had to warn everybody in advance that I had those things in my background from when I used to be a drinker. And so I'm awfully grateful to President Trump for having given me the opportunity, because he does believe, as he told me at the time, he believes in comeback stories. He believes in redemption. And so this is not a how-to book. This is not going to tell anyone how to get sober. But when I was in rehab, 5 times I was in rehab, I went to the bookstore a lot, and I read stories written by people who told their own stories about how they got through. And I decided if I ever wrote a book, that's what I wanted to write. And so if anybody picks up this book and for 5 minutes doesn't take a drink while they're flipping through it, then it will have been worth writing in the first place. That's why I wrote it.
When did you finally admit to yourself that you were an alcoholic and had a serious problem? What was your epiphany?
It was many years before I actually quit that I knew. I mean, I knew I was an alcoholic for a long time. It was just a matter of being able to stop. And for years, I was not able to stop. What got me to it, and it's not the same for everybody, but my bottom was waking up in jail in Fairfax County, Virginia, and realizing that if I didn't get my life turned around right then, that I was either going to go to jail for a very long time and lose everything, or I was going to end up being dead. And thankfully, that day that I woke up in jail, May 16th, 2015, that was the end of my drinking days. I haven't taken another drink since then. And in a couple of weeks, it'll be 9 years since that day. So I had to be threatened with complete and total personal ruin and professional ruin. It was going to be really the end of everything that I knew. And if I didn't stop drinking right then, and I did, by the grace of God, through the help of my wife and my friends and family, and 5 times in rehab, things that I learned along the way, I was able to stop. And thankfully, I was able to write a book about it. And again, it's not a how-to, but it will tell you how I did it, because those kinds of stories were helpful to me when I was in rehab and trying to figure out what tools I needed to quit. For me, it was I needed to be threatened with personal and professional complete destruction. Not everybody needs that, And some people never do get it, and sadly, they die because of the disease of addiction. And so I just wanted to be able to help some people and tell my story.
How has your past addiction impacted your perspective on politics and your method of handling the pressures and responsibilities that came with working on a major political campaign? And have you evolved in any way on your feelings about former President Trump during that time versus where we are today, as he is the GOP nominee for the presidency again?
Well, I mean, again, I was very grateful that President Trump gave me the responsibility and trusted me to run communications on his 2020 campaign. I'm very grateful to that. And he gave me the platform. I wouldn't be sitting here on your show right now if he had not hired me for that job. And for that, I'm very grateful. I still support him. I support him in 2024 as he's running for getting his old job back. And so, no, I think he was a fine president. I think this race shapes up really well for him because I think people have lived through both presidencies now. First the Trump presidency and now the Biden presidency. And I think voters can compare the two side by side based on what the successes and failures were. And I think based on that, this whole race sets up very well for Donald Trump. And as far as how did I handle it being a former drinker going through the high pressure, it is a lot of pressure working on a presidential campaign. I was able to, over the course of time, when I started on the Trump campaign, I had already not been drinking for 4 years. I was sober 4 years at that point. And I just was able to get to a point where I just determined that taking a drink of alcohol just was not something that I did anymore. It's the same approach that I have if I see in an office, if I see a plate full of donuts. I don't want to take a donut because I don't need all those empty sugar calories. So I just have decided I'm not going to pick up a donut. It's my same approach with alcohol. That doesn't work with everybody, and certainly didn't work for me for 10 years or more as I was leading up to the day where I finally ultimately quit drinking. But everybody is able to find some tools somewhere that they're able to use, even when the pressure gets going. And for me also, I relied a lot on, I should have said this at the beginning, I relied a lot on the serenity prayer. Just taking a time out for 10, 15 seconds, however long it takes you to recite that simple prayer. It sort of reordered my mind and changed the way that I was thinking about things in that moment. And the serenity prayer really helped me.
Tim Murtaugh, his book is Swing Hard. You might hit it. There he is right there. We appreciate your joining us on today's broadcast. We wish you well and congratulations on your new book. When we return,
thank you very much.
Everyone has heard so much about the Epoch Times, what they do, and their rebellion against what is going on in China. But in the next few segments, we're going to really find out more about the Epoch Times, why they cover what they cover, and why they've been so successful doing so. Bruce Fein will join us. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back. Welcome back with Bruce Fein and our guests from the Epoch Times who are joining us. Dan Berger, senior reporter from Georgia. Joshua Philipp, investigative reporter out of New York. Siyamak, Khorrami, a host of the California Insider. We welcome you all to the broadcast. Tell us about the history of the Epoch Times. When did you guys start operations in the United States? Why? I mean, because people think there's a shroud of secrecy that surrounds your international global news organizations. What is it that Americans need to know about the Epoch Times? I also find it to be fascinating. Anyone?
Siyamak, maybe better one.
Yeah, maybe I can kick this off. So this is a fascinating paper. It started by a group of Chinese Americans. And the reason it started, because there was a big persecution in China In the 90s, there's a spiritual practice. It's called Falun Dafa. It's about living by truth, compassion, tolerance, always putting others first. This is an ancient practice. It came to public in 92 in China, grew to 100 million people by 99. Then it got persecuted. When it got persecuted, it didn't get much press in the US. The founder of Epoch Times, he was going to Georgia Tech. He was a physicist. He was a PhD in physics. He tried to go to different media outlets in the US to get them to cover this persecution in China. He couldn't get anybody to really pay attention to it. And he even tried to offer ads to some of the media outlets. They didn't want the ads. So he started the paper out of his basement in Atlanta as a nonprofit. And then a lot of people joined him. And over the years, we've been covering a lot of issues, especially we focused in the beginning on China. And why this matters is because we focused on China a lot, because Chinese Communist Party, Chinese government is very good at creating propaganda. We got really good at understanding how propaganda works. And in 2003, we started the English edition. And over the years, we kept covering China. Same deal, covering a lot of human rights abuses in China. We got really good at understanding propaganda. And then when things got really wild in the US around the 2016 election, we had the skills in journalism to cover these kind of stories and to understand, to uncover what is really true, what is really happening. And that's how we were able to keep covering stories that nobody else could cover and get it right. In the media, it's very hard to get it right. Especially in 2016 election, we were able to understand that the Trump-Russia collusion narrative is not correct. That's pushed around by a lot of different media outlets. So we were the ones that actually told the truth about it. During when the virus outbreak happened, the COVID outbreak happened, we were able to know that we did our investigation work, and we knew that it came from a lab. We were the ones that reported on it. So we have been reporting on a lot of these issues that nobody else does. It's because of our background, because we've been studying how propaganda works.
Joshua, there is often this narrative of what a threat China is to the American way of life. Is that threat overstated or understated? What is it that Americans need to understand about that threat?
I'd say the threat from the Chinese Communist Party is understated, although I do think people are starting to wake up to it. My own work as an investigative reporter with Epoch Times started around 2008. I've been with them since 2006, but in 2008, I accidentally uncovered, people might have heard about these secret Chinese police stations operating in the United States. I accidentally stumbled across those back in 2008. And so a lot of my work was looking into how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to influence our political system, how they're using different means, blackmail, bribery, the whole nine yards, to gain influence over journalists, over businesses, over the systems that make our country work. And this has gotten me into researching basically how the CCP is trying to control different countries, not just the US, but even a lot of them, using non-military means, what is now known as unrestricted warfare, or this type of active measures, I think they call it. And, really, I think people are starting to wake up to it. I think COVID was a big wake-up call for a lot of the world. They started to understand, hey, maybe the Chinese Communist Party is not being totally honest about what's going on here. Maybe they're willing to intentionally spread this virus in order to damage the world economy, to bail themselves out. And the CCP, as we all know, is doing, of course, what they called vaccine diplomacy and so on, where they were capturing the markets on personal protective equipment and other things. And they were then using, these cures and systems that people needed for safety as like diplomatic leverage, while at the same time, even threatening entire countries like Australia, the US, and otherwise, if they were calling for investigations into where the virus came from. And so I would say that given this, and given the CCP's other programs of really trying to undermine the United States, absolutely, they pose a major threat to the US, and I think people are starting to wake up to that.
Are you saying, and I'm going to say this, some would say that the COVID unleashing in the lab was accidental, but the Chinese saw it as an opportunity to weaponize it?
Yeah, so look, I mean, whether we believe it came from a lab or whether we believe it was natural, aside from that, what did the Chinese Communist Party do? They restricted travel within China. Then they lied through the World Health Organization about, how dangerous the virus was. They lied through the World Health Organization saying, hey, we have it all under control. And while they were restricting travel internally in China, they opened travel externally. And as they opened external travel, allowing Chinese people to leave the country and go anywhere around the world, again, while they kept travel restricted within their own country, they seeded the virus to every corner of the world. And then at the same time, what did they do? They started capturing the market for PPE, personal protective equipment. They had Chinese agents going up and just buying in bulk all the PPE, which they then used diplomatically. Like if you wanted to get protective masks and gloves, and at the time people thought that was going to be a lifesaver, you had to agree with the CCP diplomatically or they wouldn't give it to you because they controlled the global market on it. At the same time they were doing that, they were recommending policies through the World Health Organization. Remember when Trump was president, WHO could not demonstrate independence from the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization could not demonstrate independence from the Chinese Communist Party. They were recommending policies of economic shutdown, of lockdowns, of mask mandates, and the whole 9 yards. That was all the CCP model. And while the CCP was recommending those programs, what did they do? They said, hey, virus is over, China's open for business, pour your money into China. And they attracted foreign investment to bail the CCP out economically while they destroyed the world economic system.
I don't think they destroyed the world economic system. The decisions were made in the United States. Many states differed as to the shutdown. I think it was ill-conceived, but we made our own decisions here. I don't believe that Dr. Fauci, despite the fact that I didn't agree with a lot he did, was an echo chamber of the Chinese Communist Party.
And why don't you believe that?
Because Dr. Fauci has no indication that he's visited China, spoken to their Secret Service, their leaders, has got secret bank accounts, and I'm sure given the amount of scrutiny on him, if he had bribery and money that was affecting his decisions, you can make errors that are innocent errors even without being a spy. I do not think Dr. Fauci is a spy for the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that there's an effort to overstate what China Communist Party does, what every country does. You talk about influencing elections. Our CIA's been in the business of influencing elections abroad since it was born in 1947. The first one was in Italy. We tried to influence them in Ukraine. Every country does that.
But using
What's different?
Weaponizing a virus is a different level. Millions of people died around the world. Are you comparing the two?
I do not believe at present that we have any proof that the Chinese Communist Party decided...
But you just heard it.
No, that's not proof. That's just a statement.
But he did it. They did their homework. This is what they do.
That's just a statement. It's not homework.
Okay. I know you're an expert on many things,
Yeah.
but I think they're an expert on this subject. So let me just go back to Joshua, and I just want you to challenge what my colleague is saying, because he said you're just making statements. I think this is an important conversation that's long overdue. So Joshua, I'm going to give the floor back to you.
Well, I mean, of course, I understand your viewpoint. I would say that the U.S. policy was based, and not just U.S. policy, global policy was based on the recommendations from the World Health Organization, which during the Trump presidency did analysis based on the findings, and they found the World Health Organization could not demonstrate independence from the Chinese Communist Party. That was why Trump, of course, pulled out funding from the WHO. It's why we left the WHO until Biden brought us back into it. And while, I don't know if you could say Fauci's, an agent or something like that, I agree with you on that. There is data coming out on cooperation between the NIH and the Chinese Communist Party, including vaccine research, including virus research, including what appears to be gain-of-function research, and including things that do seem to have ties with the origin.
He froze.
Yeah, but I have to respond.
Oh, no.
Give me just
of
Okay.
course.
Okay.
Of course you're going to respond,
Yeah,
brother. That's okay. I like the fact that you're being challenged in that.
Good.
Okay, but we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and continue this conversation with the Epoch Times. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
Dan Berger, I'm going to come back to Bruce and Joshua. But there are multiple calls for the arrest of Jack Smith after admitting that the documents, the Trump documents, were tampered with. How are you covering that story? Berger.
Oh, yeah, yes. Which one of us are you asking? I'm sorry.
The one that I've not talked to, Dan Berger.
I am not covering the Trump documents case.
Is anybody covering that case? Any of you?
We have numerous reporters all over the Trump's trials and cases. But
this is a big part of it. Listen, Joshua, you're not covering this case?
Only just a bit on my show. I've been covering it some, but not in depth.
And what do you know?
Well, I know that Jack Smith is being accused of several things. One of them is, of course, that, the big allegation.
He keeps freezing.
I can't hear.
Special counsel order. They arranged different documents in a certain way and took a photograph of it, and they're saying that because they arranged the documents, that represented a type of evidence tampering. And, we'll see what comes out from that. There's a lot of other allegations when it comes to Jack Smith, but ongoing investigations and ongoing allegations right now.
Bruce, comment on Jack Smith?
You have to investigate the allegations. Everything that appears in the newspaper isn't necessarily true. It's not necessarily false. That's why you have due process. That's why you have to have open investigation, see what the charges are, what the evidence shows.
Fair enough.
Open.
Jack Berger, how much do you believe, and we hear this all the time, that the White House is compromised in their relationship with the Chinese?
I was told I was going to be talking about Israel today. That's what I'm prepared to talk
brother,
about. I'm really off my patch if I'm talking about U.S. relations with China.
Okay, all right.
Other guys know far more about it than I do.
Okay, fair enough. I don't follow scripts. Israel is important. What about, where do you see, is Israel intentionally pushing back on Biden with their ceasefire because they believe that Biden is now appealing to its base because they see what's going on with the protesters, particularly in places like Michigan, which are battleground states? How much are U.S. politics influencing the Biden's pushing back on Netanyahu? And why isn't Netanyahu listening?
you're asking why you don't think Netanyahu is listening. I think he is listening, but the politics that he is concerned with are his own politics in Israel. He faces difficulties in both directions. He has a large percentage of the population that wants him out of office, and that probably more than a majority now. Not just the liberal left side that wanted him out of office before October 7th, but other people who think that he needs to take responsibility for Israel's security failure that led up to October 7th. So he has that to worry about. He has Israel's security to worry about. He has promised people to get rid of Hamas, and I think that a majority of Israelis support that, want that, and he's almost finished, but not quite finished. It won't be finished until they go into Rafah, which it appears they're sizing up to do right now. He also has to worry about the United States. He has to worry about the U.S. is Israel's biggest ally. Israel needs American financial aid, but moreover, it's international support and its support in the UN. And they have been under very heavy pressure from the Biden administration not to go into Rafah. But any kind of ceasefire or ending of this with Hamas still in power is unacceptable to the administration there, to the Israeli administration, to Netanyahu's government, and I believe also to a majority of the Israeli people. And I think they have given Hamas every chance to. Hamas could end this war quickly by letting go of the hostages. Netanyahu would be under great pressure to settle, and he could basically say, "We won. We got the hostages back." I think he would save face. He could end that. He could end the war. That's all they have to do. No one seems to be asking why does Hamas not release the hostages now? I think they're down to their last 48 hours or so. I believe as Israel is getting ready to go into Rafah.
Khorrami, let me raise. Could you discuss how the recent statements by President Biden might affect the U.S. media coverage of international affairs, particularly with respect to India and Japan?
I'm not the best expert on that one. I'm more focused on California, and I don't want to make statements on something I'm not an expert in.
So let me raise this with you then. With the ongoing tensions in Gaza, what role do you think international media plays in the shaping the public perception about what is actually happening there? And are these perceptions real? Do they have their own agenda? Or do you also accuse this media, of propaganda?
So in terms of Gaza's coverage, so media has a big role in Middle East. And I'm not the best expert on this, but I grew up in Middle East, so I can tell you the way media works, it puts fuels on the fire. So that's something that people have to really pay attention, what they see, if it's fabricated, if it's true, and not get overly emotional about it if they don't know much about it. So that's the key thing to pay attention to when it comes to Middle East. There's a lot of propaganda that's going around in Middle East.
Joshua, what is really interesting about the Epoch Times coverage, the way you guys cover Trump across the board is very different than the way the mainstream media covers him. It's as if you're talking about two different Trumps. Explain that dichotomy.
Well, so when it comes to Donald Trump, I think our policy was to look at things independently, which is a standard we have in just about every issue. We don't just go by what the rest of the media is saying. We have standards of independence when it comes to how we assess things. We have standards of independence when it comes to, how we frame our angles and how we look into stories. And when it came to Donald Trump, one of the trends we kept seeing was that it didn't look like the media was being honest oftentimes. Siyamak earlier mentioned the whole Trump-Russia allegations. Very early on, We noted, in fact, we did some very in-depth investigations that actually the facts weren't really there. And we did find later that actually, of course, the Trump-Russia allegations came about through, well, it was actually opposition research funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. And they went through, again, a former British spy, Christopher Steele, who then, of course, collected the information from unverified Russian sources. It was rumor, basically, that they paid for. And they never were able to really verify any of it, but they spread it. They used it to, of course, launch investigations into Trump. And really, again, it looked like it was opposition research that had gotten out of hand. And media was piggybacking on existing coverage, repeating it and expanding it, but the foundation was false. And so, very early on, we were just saying that, hey, this doesn't really line up. None of this stuff is verifiable. It looks like it's fake, actually. And when you investigated it, you did find that key figures helped concoct the whole thing. And so, we, of course, exposed that. And, that's just one example of a lot of different areas of coverage in terms of how we covered what was happening during the Trump administration. And, in case in point, even when it comes to some of the other investigations into Trump, and, for example, allegations of, weaponization of justice, when the special counsel was, of course, looking into the different campaigns going after Trump, right? Not Mueller, but the one looking into, of course, the Biden administration and investigating the whole Trump-Russia scandal. The conclusion was that there was confirmation bias. That, they were spreading false information, including in the concocting of the Trump-Russia scandal, but it was confirmation bias. They wanted so badly to find dirt on him that they were willing to believe anything. And, that was the conclusion, right?
You wanted to follow up when I mentioned the weaponizing of the Chinese. Of course, you wanted to follow up.
My observation is, simply because errors are made does not mean that the Chinese Communist Party sat down in the Politburo or President Xi said, hey, let's go kill all these people around the world. What we'll do is we'll have COVID escape from Wuhan labs, and then we'll send Chinese who have COVID all around the world, and they'll infect everybody else, like they got rabies or smallpox. I do not think that evidence has surfaced that justifies, that conclusion. Now, maybe it is some there, but I certainly have not read anything close to being reliable that suggests that was the concerted plot of President Xi, who really is the Chinese Communist Party, because there's virtually no dissent. And he sat down, this is the way I'll get back at the rest of the world. He does a lot of other things that are very evil. I don't think that's one of them.
Dan,
we actually thought that this didn't, it wasn't like that. We, from our understanding, this was an accident that actually escaped the lab, and then the Chinese Communist Party tried to use it. Once it was spreading, they figured out this is spreading, and they might as well benefit from the pandemic. That's what we've come to conclusion of.
Dan, before we go to break, could you provide for us an update on the key issues currently affecting the border security and immigration policy here in the United States?
Go ahead.
Maybe I can comment on that, because I recently did a long investigation. I was actually in Panama. I've been, of course, into Mexico, and I've been investigating what's really behind the border crisis. As part of my investigation, I went to Darien, which is the mouth of the Darien Gap in Panama. And what I found is that there is a system facilitating mass migration towards the United States. They have bus systems, they have protocols even when they reach the US-Mexico border, including in Texas and in California, both of which I personally witnessed and even videotaped. In fact, I have a documentary coming out very soon on it. There is an agreement that the United States is part of, as are many countries throughout Latin America, called the Global Compact for Migration, that establishes the processes and the systems that are facilitating this. The buses, the processing of individuals, getting them registered on the amnesty system, the CBP-1 app, Customs Border Protection app, where people can schedule to even be flown into the United States as part of it. And so, it is a facilitated process. There are things in place for it. And I think the public is only recently coming to understand that.
I'm Armstrong Williams, your voice, your future, and we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So Dan Berger, how are the Arab states looking upon this escalation between Israel and Hamas, and why is it that the Arab states don't do more to provide relief and take many of these refugees in?
That's a very good question, why they don't. The answer is quite interesting. The Arab states have, by and large, become very tired of the Palestinian issue. Numerous of them feel that they have personally been betrayed by the Palestinians when they sought to give them, allowed them to be in their countries or gave them assistance. The Palestinians were destabilizing Arab countries as early as the mid-1950s. They tried to destabilize the Nasser regime, which was the most anti-Israel regime among Israel's immediate neighbors for decades. They destabilized Jordan, they destabilized Lebanon, they destabilized Kuwait and other states. They don't want to take them in because they don't want to be destabilized, and increasingly they want to have trade and security ties with Israel. Some of this has to do with tensions between the Arabs and the Iranians. The Iranians are seen as the bigger threat, and the Arab states know that Israel is really no threat to them, that it doesn't desire their territory, it doesn't want to go to war, it wants peace. And meanwhile, you have this country, and you have a small but technologically powerful country with a strong economy. They want to have trade ties. This war started because Hamas was so afraid that the Saudis were close to making a peace deal with the Israelis. And if they do that, other Arab states will follow, because Saudi, that's where Islam, that's the homeland of Islam. And if the Saudis do it, it's okay for everyone. This was a last-minute desperation thing by Hamas. They were hoping that other states would join in the war. None of them did. Hezbollah was planning to. Hezbollah decided not to because Israel reinforced the north border so quickly on October the 7th. Hezbollah now stands off and launches rockets, and I think there's some skirmishes around the border, but nothing like October 7th. So I think quietly the Arab states are waiting for this to be over so that they can go ahead and make peace with Israel.
Khorrami, how do you think California's budget deficit will impact its ability to implement public services and infrastructure projects?
It's going to be big ramifications, and the way the California government is right now dealing with this budget in deficit is actually pushing it to future years. And there's a big discrepancy with what California government is claiming the budget deficit is versus the legislative office. There's almost $30 billion discrepancy is what the California government is saying versus the legislative analyst office. Right now, they are saying there's going to be minimal impacts because they're pushing all the costs to the future years, including the payroll. So the last day of payroll is on June 30th of this year. They're pushing it into July 1st to save $1.6 billion.
Joshua, what is your analysis of where we are in this presidential election? The reality of where Biden is, where Trump is, Robert Kennedy Jr. Do you think that the Democrats would maintain control of the Senate? How vulnerable are Republicans in the House?
In terms of the election, honestly, it's been kind of wild, and I don't think we've ever seen an election like this. One of the major candidates is basically campaigning from the courtroom. The incumbent president is not even on the ballot in all 50 states yet, and Biden, of course, is not really campaigning very hard. And you're also dealing with a new third-party candidate. RFK Jr. is actually presenting a pretty significant threat, mainly to Biden. You're looking at about 9 to 10% of the vote going to him potentially. So, we'll see where that goes. At the same time, Biden is dealing with the protests of what represent more the grassroots of, the far left of the Democrat Party, and rifts developing because of that among his own party. And so, he risks losing the moderates to RFK Jr. He also risks having the far left break away, depending on how the Israeli-Hamas war goes. And so that's a real risk to him. A lot of his campaign was also based more on kind of, get Trump. Barack Obama has been advising Biden, for example, to, campaign on his victories, to not focus so much just on trying to go after his opponent, Trump. And Trump is, I think they did bet a little too heavily on the prosecutions maybe getting Trump off the campaign trail and getting him removed from the ballot. Those, even though Trump might go to prison, who knows at this point, it's not going to get him off the ballot. And so the entire agenda they had on that and the hope they had that would reduce his polling numbers didn't play out the way they thought it would. And so, given all of this, I don't know where it's going to be. If we go by polling, it's going to be a very close race. And of course, the introduction, of course, of third-party candidates, especially RFK Jr., does risk having kind of like a Ross Perot moment where it could split the vote for Democrats.
Bruce, what about the Democrats calculating their attack, saying that the Supreme Court justices are slow-walking these cases to delay them, these conservatives, in the favor of the former president?
Well, they can say that. It's true that in the past, when you had cases involving the president, for example, U.S. versus Nixon, the famous tapes case, they decided on a supersonic fast track. That is, they leapfrogged over the Court of Appeals and decided the case within a week after the oral argument in July. I was there when they decided, and Nixon resigned a few days afterwards. So, and I was a little bit surprised myself that, given the fact that this particular issue of absolute immunity that's before the court is not novel, because I lived through it. I was involved in those exact questions when President Nixon encountered Watergate. The Justice Department opined at that time, well, an incumbent president can't be prosecuted, but it explicitly stated, once he's out of office, then the criminal justice system ticks in. It's the same view that Mitch McConnell took when he decided he's going to vote for acquittal of the second impeachment. He said, well, afterwards the criminal or civil justice system can pick in. So I don't think these are totally novel questions. And why, they scheduled the argument, for the last time in April, and they can take the calendar however fast they want to. It is a little bit puzzling to me why they have taken this time. Now, there may be reasons relating to dockets that I don't know about, because I don't know exactly what the behind-the-scenes discussions are. But I would be very, very surprised to think that this was a partisan gesture to say, hey, let's save Trump. And they got together and said, let's influence the outcome of the 2024 election and let's delay our decision on this. That's just not the Supreme Court that I know, and justices, I've known many of them. Whatever else you can say about them, they can get it right or wrong. No, they're not about throwing the court into the political realm and being partisan.
Dan Berger, I'm going to take a leap of faith here with you. It's not an Israel question, but what is the fate of Ukraine?
It seems that that Israel and Ukraine have been linked a lot in the certainly in the minds of people involving foreign funding or involving U.S. funding of them. But I don't know that I think they're very different situations. I can't really comment in any great detail about Ukraine. It's not my area of specialty.
let me come back to you, Joshua. The fact that it seems that there's so many leaks from the U.S. economy to our foreign policy, this presidential race, it doesn't seem to disrupt the American economy. It remains robust and it remains strong.
There's different arguments on the economy. Of course, the Federal Reserve has been trying to balance it, and they've been facing a lot of accusations about how well they're doing and how well they might not be doing. People are pointing to jobs reports, and they're noting that it looks like a lot of the jobs, the new ones being created, are more federal government jobs, and a lot of them, of course, are going to, mass illegal migrants, people entering this country by the millions. That being said, though, to be fair, as Biden has noted, and there is some truth to this, the entire world economy was mostly destabilized. A lot of the world economy was kind of badly damaged during COVID-19 and the economic shutdown. A good amount of that was also from the shipping crisis, which, as we know, the Chinese Communist Party had rolling lockdowns there as well, which, Biden was saying, and Democrats were pointing out, that we're going to keep seeing economic problems as long as there's going to be these lockdowns economically because of the interconnectedness of the global economy. And, given that situation, it is fair to say that the United States has recovered faster than most other countries on Earth. But at the same time, too, we are facing, I think, the repercussions of, some bad fiscal policies that are catching up with us. We probably will see the impact of inflation.
Khorrami, in the final minute, how can people find out more about the Epoch Times, and what is it that separates you from the pack?
So Epoch Times, we focus on the issues first, and then we go and analyze if the politicians in charge were Republicans or Democrats. We focus on covering issues the way they are. And we are taking our emotions out of the stories. Emotions as journalists. So that's what it separates us from the pack. And they can go to theepochtimes.com, and I host a show on California. If people are interested in California, they can watch our show, California Insider.
Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Bruce, Ted, Murtaugh, who joined us earlier, Joshua, Khorrami, Dan Berger, and we look forward to having you back, not together again, but as individuals. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us for your voice, your future. I'm Armstrong Williams.